Here's a review on solving quadratics and the different methods that we use. So the first one we used was factoring. So it must be equal to 0, and then I'm going to factor it. So two numbers that multiply to negative 40 and make negative 6. So we find those numbers, that's 10 and 4, right? So negative 10 and 4. We write down those factors. We take each factor equal to 0 and solve it. So the first answer would be positive 10, and the second answer would be negative 4. Same thing here for number 2. Is it equal to 0? That's 49 and negative 14. This happens to be the same number, so we don't need to write down it twice. We can just write it down once and then add 7, and you have your answer. For number 3, it's not equal to 0, so we need to subtract x squared. Now it's 9x squared minus 25. This is a square root question. So the square root of 9x squared, the square root of 25. And one's going to be adding, and one is going to be subtracting. So there are two different factors. So we take each factor equal to 0 and solve it. So for the first factor that we're doing, we're going to subtract 5, and then we're going to divide by 3. So one answer is that. The second answer, we're going to add 5 and then divide by 3. So one answer is negative 5 over 3, and the other answer is positive 5 over 3. In number 4, it's equal to 0. I'm going to factor not by square rooting, but what's the largest number that goes into both, and they both have algebra, and then you divide. Then we take each factor equal to 0 and solve it. So in this case, divide by 4. And 0 divided by 4 is 0. In this case, we're going to subtract 2 and then divide by 3. So one answer is 0, and the other answer is negative 2/3. Again, it needs to be equal to 0, so we're going to subtract 26x, so it's equal to 0. In this situation, I can divide by 2 to simplify it. That will make it easier. So that's 1x squared minus 13x plus 40. Now I can draw that big X and figure out two numbers that multiply to 40 and add to negative 13. Those are your factors, negative 8 and negative 5. Then each factor equal to 0 and solve it. So each factor equal to 0, add 8. Take the factor equal to 0, add 5, and you have your two answers. All right, last one like this where we factor. There's nothing to divide to simplify it down. So I need to take the first number times the last number. That's 4, and then 5 is the middle number underneath. So two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 5. So I'm going to write that down, positive 4 and positive 1. Then I'm going to take the leading number and divide both numbers by it. So I have x plus 1 equals 0, subtract it. The fraction, I'm not going to slide. I'm going to just write it as that fraction, and then I'm going to subtract 1/4 to the other side. So one answer is negative 1/4, and the other answer is negative 1. So that's the first method. The second method is square roots. To square root, you need to isolate the x squared and then square root. And again, the answer is going to have two answers here. So it's not just 15, but it's positive and negative 15. So make sure you have two solutions here. So what number times itself is 225? It's 15. Here for number 8, we want to get x squared by itself, so not equal to 0. So we're going to add 1, and then we're going to divide. Now, when you square root a fraction, it's just square rooting the top number and square rooting the bottom number. So what's the square root of 49, and what's the square root of 4? And it doesn't have to be difficult. Number 9, to get x squared by itself, add 3. That's 98. And then square root. There is no number times itself. That's 98, so we can leave the answer just like that. For number 10, get x squared by itself, so subtract 1. And then to undo a fraction, you multiply times the reciprocal. So the reciprocal gets x squared by itself. It's always easier to divide first. So 30 divided by 3 first, that's 10. And then 10 times 4 is 40. Square root, there is no number times itself that equals 40. So the answer is positive and negative root 40. All right, turn the page. The next method is completing the square. So in this situation, we have a formula that we're going to use. So I'll write it down right here. It's b divided by 2 and squared. That gives us like a magic number. So for this case, it's negative 18 divided by 2 and square. Now I need both numbers. So negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. I'm going to need that number. And negative 9 squared is 81. So we start with 81. So I'm going to add 81 to the left, and I'm going to add 81 to the right. So 0 plus 81 is that. The first three terms I'm going to factor, and that 65, I'm going to subtract it to the other side. So what two numbers factor this? It's that number that's inside the parentheses. It's negative 9. So it's negative 9 and negative 9. And on the other side, 81 take away 65. That number is it 16. We're going to square root. That means the answer could be positive or negative 4. And then add 9 to the other side. So I add 9 to the other side. So 9 plus 4 is one answer. And then 9 take away 4, that's the other answer. Number 12, it must be, we need the magic number. So I'm going to take 16 divided by 2 and square it. I'm going to need both numbers. So the 8 and the 64. So I have 64, I have 55, and then I need 64 on the right side too. So to factor this, I need the 8. So it's 8 and 8. I'm going to subtract 55 and combine it all together. So 64 plus 3 is 67. Take away 55. That gives me 12. Then I'm going to square root. That answer is positive or negative, the square root of 12. There's no number times itself that equals 12. You can leave it. And then the last step is to subtract 8. And they're unlike numbers. So the negative 8 can just go in front of the square root of 12. And there you solved it. This one and this one, we're going to not do. So cross those out. All right, last method is the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula, again, is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. In this situation, the first number is a, the second number is 12, and the last number is c. And then we plug it into the formula. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now we're going to evaluate what I see. So that's 144. A negative times a negative is plus. 24 times 4 is 80. It's 96. 144 plus 96 is it 240? So let's see, 56 and 40. Yeah, it's 240. There is no number times itself that's 240, so we're going to leave that as the answer. Sure I did the work right. All right. Number 16. A is negative 1, B is negative 3, and C is 9. So the formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So plus or minus 3, or negative and a negative 3 is positive 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. A negative times a negative is positive 36. Oh, there's too many plus or minuses here. All right, so we have 9 plus 36, which is 45, divided by negative 2. There is no number times itself that equals 45, so that's the answer. Number 17, we need to get it equal to 0. So we need to subtract 9 first. So negative x squared plus 4x minus 9. Now it's equal to 0. A is negative 1, B is 4, C is negative 9. And to solve it, the formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then I'm going to simplify it. So negative 4 plus or minus the square root of, so 4 squared is 16. A negative times a negative times a negative. So that's minus 36 over that. See, 16. Now, at this point we say there's no real solution. Why is that? Because you can't take the square root of a negative number. All right, last one. Make it equal to 0, subtract x. Add 5. And now we can write down that A is 3, B is negative 10, and C is 5. And then write down the formula. Negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So a negative times a negative is positive 10. The square root of 10 squared is 100. And then 4 times 3 times 5 is 60. That's over 6. 100 take away 60 is 40. There is no number times itself that equals 40 over 6, and there are your answers. All right, good job reviewing the different ways you can solve quadratic equations. Mrs. G Math, Mr. G Math, over now.